Mollie, thanks for joining me here today. If you just want to go ahead and tell me a little bit about how the story behind sleep is a skill.
Yes. Well, yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, the story behind sleep as a skill is really that I was solving my own problem as it related to my sleep, and for having many, many years of my life just relating to myself as just a bad sleeper, no big deal. I've always been like that, not a problem. I'm a night owl. I go to bed pretty much as the sun is rising. That's what I do, not to be really examined. And yet as life went on like that, as an entrepreneur, added more stressors and more things to my plate, started really burning the candle at both ends, started getting sick more often, more anxious and stressed, until I actually went through my first real experience of insomnia, which lasted, it began when I started traveling with my boyfriend internationally and started adding jet lag into these kind of maladaptive sleep behaviors. And it actually ended up being one of the most kind of transformative periods of my life, when it became abundantly clear that how I was managing my health, and certainly as it related to my sleep, was just not a winning combination. So, and of course I can look back at it and laugh and be grateful, but at the time it was very scary and very confusing on how to restore kind of health and homeostasis to this area that felt very ironic, that, and hence the name of sleep as a skill, is that it seems as if this would be something that would be a given for any of us to be able to achieve something so primal as to the ability to be able to sleep. And yet, certainly I went through this very challenging period of not being able to sleep, and just, entire nights after nights of just nothing. And during that period, it was a scary question of, okay, so how can I sleep again? And without having to go down what for me felt like a path that I wasn't interested in, of going into pharmaceuticals and all of that, which is actually what, when I went to the doctors, the first time I was in Croatia, and I had Google Translate, and they basically gave me their version of Ambien. And
Right.
it was a real wake-up call of, there's got to be another way than this. And so then I just really dedicated all of myself, because nothing was working at that point. I couldn't, get anything done. I couldn't be relied upon, none of it, because I just couldn't count on myself to do the most fundamental thing, which was sleep. So I really threw myself into understanding more about this, and then became really fascinated in the area of circadian rhythms and chronobiology. And then it began to be this question of, why don't we all know about this? And why aren't we all more aligned with this approach that could really support our health and well-being? And so once I began to restore some balance to my sleep, and then looking to, beyond just bring balance, actually optimize sleep in a way that I had never experienced in my life, started bringing that to friends and family. And then it just sort of began to emerge from there, and started having small group trainings on it. And now we have online courses for it, and podcasts on the topic. And it just really blossomed into this really exciting area.
Yeah, me personally, my first, the time, historically, I've always slept. I've never really had much trouble sleeping, but there was a time period of my life started about 6 years ago, 5, maybe even 7 years ago now, that I went through this period of chronic pain, that I had sleeping problems for a while, and ended up having this shoulder surgery, and then that didn't really totally help the problem, and I dealt with the chronic pain for a while, and then eventually I got that resolved and started sleeping okay again. But it's no, the sleep is the worst, because when it just sort of screws up everything, I feel, that once, if you can't get the sleep right.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. And it really became obvious that, for at least in my experience and seemingly many others, that just without sleep, nothing really works. And it just is insidious and finds its way into so many areas of our lives. And I think we're at this interesting point in history of really beginning to understand even more how crucial this area is. And of course, there's kind of that common sense, well, yeah, of course, sleep's important, but really beginning to wrap our heads around it on a deeper level with some of the more interesting research coming out, certainly in more recent years, and to the mainstream audience.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, you were talking about pharmaceuticals. I mean, I feel people, often there's that kind of stigma with pharmaceuticals. And I mean, my view is that they're sort of like a tool like anything else. But,
yes, sure.
But obviously there's side effects, and most of them, if you're relying on them for a long period of time, there's some certain side effects and consequences. But I found one of the, besides, I mean, they can have some useful properties, but I find that my experience is not really a lot of good pharmaceuticals that they usually help you. They can help you fall asleep, but they don't really help you stay asleep. I don't know if
absolutely. Yeah. And the type of sleep then that you tend to get from, some of the hypnotics on the market,
right.
or, for often in an older generation that were given more benzodiazepines. Yeah, it's more of the sedative quality to the sleep, and the sleep architecture looks very different. It's interesting. I can often tell now with my clients, based on the different sleep tech that I have them wearing, even if they're across the world, I can look at their sleep stats from the night before and know if they took, Xanax or what have you to sleep, or if they didn't, based on some of the ways that their heart rate looks, their respiratory rate, their HRV. There's a number of things that then just so clearly deviate when they're really sedated and when they're not.
Right. One of the supplements I found to be herbs that helpful for my personal, when I was having a lot of sleep issues and anxiety, was ashwagandha. I don't know if your clients, or you've used it yourself.
Yeah, that's a great one too. And because there's so many kind of natural things that we can do to make a difference in our sleep. And a lot of what I look at with people is behavioral based in a lot of ways, and environmental, from an approach of the large overarching framework is from circadian rhythm entrainment. And from that approach, then we're kind of going from top down of some of the things that can impact sleep or the strength of our circadian rhythm, number one being light. And so being really incredibly mindful of our light environment. So I have people
Right.
Getting sun exposure first thing in the morning to act as that kind of anchor for their circadian rhythm. And of course, not just from behind a window, but literally getting outside and getting it on the surface of their skin, not wearing sunglasses, not wearing baseball hats, and really optimizing for that, and photoreceptors in our, every day. So calibrating that, and then actually optimizing for the other side of light being darkness, and really cultivating an environment where we get far more darkness than the average person, at least in a Western society. And, so different ways to do that, but still be a part of normal culture too, and be a part of the, 2020, and how to do that. And so that's, light and darkness. And then below that for circadian rhythm entrainment is temperature. And so of course there's environmental temperatures, but then, kind of tucked underneath that are the things that we do to shift our temperature, which, can of course be things like exercise, but then meal timing is really fascinating, one that can confuse the body and act as a signal. If we engage in kind of upside down meal timing, which is what I used to do. I used to kind of backload my meal timing and eat most of my food, the largest percentage at the end of the day, basically, like shortly before bed, or just mindlessly, in front of Netflix or something, and then would have no real correlation to the understanding that is impacting, my heart rate at night, my HRV, my body temperature, and then of course quality of my sleep. But also the thing that seems even more interesting, or not even more, but equally interesting, is how many people will be like, oh, well, I don't eat right before bed, but they might eat, a couple hours still before bed. And what we're really looking at is even kind of having people have as a bare minimum about 4 hours before bed to optimize for lymphatic drainage. So that cleansing process of the brain during slow wave sleep. And so even if you stop eating your last morsel of food about 4 hours before bed, it really is interesting the changes in some of your biomarkers that we see. And there's some interesting research on that from Dr. Sachin Panda. He wrote the circadian code and, looking at some of the effects that can have. And then, so that's all in the realm of temperature. But then even the idea of thought timing is, I think, fascinating, that there are certain types of thoughts that we might be engaging in the evening that are literally charged, but literally heating us up. So there's products on the market. I had the inventor of this product called EBB, which I mentioned because it's interesting about it. The whole function of it is basically to cool down the prefrontal cortex, because often people that are having difficulty sleeping are exhibiting kind of this hyper aroused brain state, and then their brain tissue is heating up.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that reminds me of there's this she was sort of a grandmother, it was like my adopted grandmother that she ended up passed away about a year ago during around Mother's Day, right, like a couple of days before Mother's Day, and her name was Millie, and she used to say, I remember, it sounds like in her kind of more of a kind of layman's terms, that she felt that like if she would like speak on the phone too late at night, she would say that she got overstimulated and so she couldn't sleep properly.
Yes, I so agree with that. Absolutely. So there can be a bit of a strategy and an approach to the types of, the types of content that we're engaging in. So what we're taking in and intake, and then also being mindful of, what's internally being generated and then the effects that can have. So that's a little trippy. and then of course there's, other things that can impact our temperature based almost from a chronopharmacology perspective, whether it's the types of, drugs that we might be taking, but then even on just a more kind of mass situation of so many people, just drinking casually at night, and the rise in body temperature that can bring about, coffee being another one to look out for, and then even dehydration, what that can do to your HRV, but then some of your sleep quality. But so all of those kind of being tucked under this circadian rhythm entrainment framework. But then in addition, we also look at what we call the sleep tripod approach. So understanding that in order to get great sleep, that we really want to look at the workability between the psychology, so our kind of framework and our mental approach to sleep, and then our physiology, so understanding if there's some things maybe out of whack with our overall health and well-being, and then as well as environmental. And so having workability in all three of those. And sometimes there's things that are glaringly kind of out of alignment in one of those areas more than the rest, but often they really feed into each other. So kind of going to work on that. And then, I'm often speaking about the challenges in the 21st century around our sleep, really post Edison, and the ability to augment our days and really live outside of the natural rhythms of nature of sunrise and sunset in a way that really none of our ancestors engaged in, beyond maybe like a bonfire or some candles once in a while, a lantern for the wealthy, or for longer extended periods of time. But for the most part, we were really beholden to those rhythms of nature. And then, but at the same time, while, we might be looking at that from a guidepost of, the current technology that is available still can be really helpful for us to help navigate out of the kind of mess that we've gotten ourselves into from a place of such high sleep deprivation rates and perceived to be going up, not down. So
I was wondering what
tech that's available to look at sleep through kind of new eyes, and then start to become, more responsible for the fact that, oh my God, the things that I'm doing are actually making a difference in my sleep. It's not just innate or, gene phenomenon. It actually, we have a lot of say of how it all looks and goes.
No, I was wondering because it sounds like you probably are familiar with it, or if you're not familiar with it, you're kind of employing some of the principles or methods about the quantified self movement. Are you familiar with that? Hello? Hello?
Oh, shoot. I seem to have lost you during that part. I'm so sorry about that. That's literally never happened.
No, it's all good.
I missed that.
Are you familiar with the quantified self movement at all?
Yes. Oh, Kevin Kelly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I
I,
love, yeah, very familiar.
yeah. Yeah. I went to one of their conferences a while ago. This is like, yeah, about 7, 8 years ago in Palo Alto. And at the time, I remember one of the big companies that everybody was using to track their sleep was the Zio. And I remember they
Yes,
went out of business.
I used to
And
have the Zio.
okay. And what do you use now to measure those kinds of things?
Yeah, well, that's so funny you mentioned the Zio. Yeah, they were sort of ahead of their time out of
Yeah.
Newton, Massachusetts. Yeah, so now, and of course, granted, the gold standard is the polysonogram. And, so the things that are on the market are not going to get us those sort of results. However, there are certain things that we can extract with a decent amount of accuracy as it relates to, certain studies that compare to the polysonogram, but so case by case basis. So, for example, I have just about every client that I work with, usually wearing the Oura ring, but I also, with the caveat that I tell just about all of them not to really pay much attention to the sleep stages because, unfortunately, they're just not there yet. Because for most of these, there can be a little bit more of a ability to have a bit more insight with some of the ones that are on your head, like the Dream, DREEM. But, it can be challenging to wear on a regular basis for many people, especially for women. We've got our, long hair and just for, maybe 1 or 2 nights. But, as a regular thing, we still have some challenges of how to make that kind of a habit. But what's interesting about some of these sleep trackers is a lot of them tend to be pretty solid with a couple things. One, total time duration, kind of getting a look at wake ups, and then, things like heart rate, the pattern of your heart rate throughout the night, your HRV. Granted, they're different. They have whole different algorithms based on which one you're looking at, which type of sleep tracker, and body temperature can be insightful. And then elements that you can glean from respiratory
The
rate.
movement. I know some of them, like
Yeah.
the early. I don't remember the name of it. I had an app on my iPhone that, like, its main premise was like tracking the accelerometer, tracking movement.
Yeah. Oh, like sleep cycles was, kind of there's a bunch of different ones that can, pull from even just you're using your phone or, there's a lot of different things that we can understand from those. And basically what's nice about some of these is that it can kind of just act as a bit more of an automated sleep diary, because certainly in the past that used to be some of the old adage, if you're having sleep troubles, to start, keep a sleep diary, in analog sense. But now being able to have something that can a bit more automatically do that, and of course if you have discrepancies, logging those or tagging them, but you do get to see a decent amount of insight. And particularly over the long term, you can start to extrapolate some patterns for yourself of things that are working and not working.
So, yeah, the focus of my podcast is about traumatic experiences and how people recover from traumatic experiences. So, and then obviously, sleeping problems often are one of the side effects of people that go through traumatic experiences. So, how, like, a lot of the clients that you work with, you see a lot of work with a lot of people that have gone through trauma and PTSD, that type of thing.
Yeah, actually, that seems to be really pervasive with a lot of people that, because by the time you're coming to something like sleep as a skill, there's a couple different types of people. Some, just the avid biohackers, that are looking to always further optimize and take it to the next level. There's that group. There's, the women going through menopause that are, having difficulties with hormonal instability and hot flashes, and just suddenly, they were having fine sleep and now they're not sleeping, kind of groups along those lines. But then there are also people that have been dealing with just this sense that, a difficulty to be able to control their thoughts. And I can't turn off my brain, and persistent nightmares, and, just this ability or a sense of a lack of a locus of control around how their nights go. And absolutely, trauma being linked up with those. I've seen different vets come our way. It's also a lot of people post-retirement that will, come to Sleep is a Skill complaining of difficulty sleeping. Of course, then there can be multiple things going on with as you age in different seasons of our lives and the change in sleep just naturally. But, if you pair that with trauma, it can be particularly challenging.
And another question I have for you is that one of my friends, that he has this sleep app. I was wondering if you ever heard of it, called Piz, like.
Oh yes, it's great for particularly naps. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know him, Rockwell?
Yeah, I don't know him personally, but I
Yeah.
do know of the app. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it really has this kind of trance-like effect, and it's so interesting how effective it can be for a lot of people.
Yeah. What about? I mean, it sounds like you would use this kind of stuff. The binaural beats. What do you think about that stuff?
Yeah, those are interesting. So one of the things that I'm kind of one of the frameworks or approaches is to what I call the desert island approach, and how to get ourselves as kind of one of the goals that if we were to be dropped on a desert island with nothing but just the clothes on our back, to know ourselves as the type of people to be able to get great sleep. So while I'll look at a lot of different types of sleep tech and things and accoutrements and the sleep industry, oh my goodness, it is huge, and it's such a money maker right now. And
Yeah.
there's so many things that you can go broke on, and and not to say that it relates to binaural beats, but also just how many things I think at the root cause of it we can be doing that are missing, that can help create the amount of melatonin that is necessary so that we are sleeping on a regular and consistent schedule, and kind of a lot of this becomes more effortless. And of course, and that takes a lot of commitment and time and energy and discipline. Yeah, exactly. But what I think is possible is when we do get some of the fundamental things aligned, then these extra elements can be great, but then we're not reliant on them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. I mean, with this kind of thing, part of my approach. I've gotten a little, not as into as I used to be, but I was sort of into that biohacking kind of stuff. Is how it led me to some of this stuff. But with something like binaural beats, it's not going to really. It's something just to try to see if you respond to it or not. It's not really a big investment.
Yes, totally. And it can be such a cool way, especially for a mind that has been just overactive and kind of on autopilot, like many of us that have had trouble sleeping at different points in our lives. It's like just the help and the support, and that can act as a kind of audio version of that, and help on this kind of inexplicable level start kind of bringing coherence to our brain patterns. And it can be really, really fascinating. And some of the studies around things like that, and just sound in general. So, some of the more basic sound elements, looking at, white noise, pink noise, and brown noise, and certain theories around could some of these different kind of background elements of sound amplify the amount of slow wave sleep that we're getting. So there's still more studies to be done on to kind of get a real kind of a conclusive evidence or idea on that one. But it certainly is interesting, and the effects are really very cool and intriguing. So it's a cool area.
I meant to actually look up this for my own interest before speaking with you this time, but the blue light blocking glasses. What is the? I'm curious. What's the research? What type of research is behind that technique or that? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Great question. So the blue light blocking glasses, there's a number of them, some that arguably work, to fulfill on the name of blocking blue light specifically. And then there's others that don't work so great, to fulfill on that name of blocking blue light. So there's clear ones, and many of those, unfortunately, don't do a whole heck of a lot. But then you can move up, to even very inexpensive, kind of like safety goggles looking ones that are orange, and those can block a percentage of the blue light. And then you can move up the rungs even further to red lenses that can block portions of the blue and green in the light spectrum.
So basically, the cool, clear looking ones don't really, they look cool, but they don't do anything.
Yeah, they really don't do a ton, and it's such a bummer. As you know, it would just be so great if they did a lot, but unfortunately, particularly for night, I mean, they're just not really going to cut it. And especially, try going into like a Walmart or something and wearing those and thinking that it won't, that would protect you from the massive amounts of blue light. It's unlikely.
Well, have you seen? Speaking of this, one of the reasons I brought it up, this company,
Yeah.
I have one of their watches, Movement, and they recently came out with these blue light blocking glasses. But they have some really good ads, but they look kind of clear, and they probably don't do a whole lot. I don't know if you've heard. It's spelled MVMT, Movement.
Yeah, I have seen those, and they look like beautiful. So
Yeah, they
from
do.
what I've seen, I haven't tried them. Yeah, right. But unfortunately, with some of the tests that you can do with them, so I haven't had them, but I did have another client that had tested them, and it didn't seem to, block the blue light in the way that the amazing advertising seems to show. But hopefully that what can be next is to beginning to start to popularize this kind of weird look, like that Bono-esque look of having the either amber or red, which those ones can actually really make a difference. And so the reason, to kind of underscore the why of that is that, first of all, it can help to know that our master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, is really linked up closely with, as far as our optic nerves. And so the light going into our eyes is particularly vulnerable as far as the kind of cues to that master clock. And so if we are pummeling it with this kind of non-native blue light in such high percentages, the problem is that then that in studies shows a suppression effect around melatonin production. And so if you're looking to be able to create a consistent, bedtime, wake time, and then just like I did for many years, have this experience of why can I not go to sleep at the time I want to go to sleep? Having really no awareness of the things that I was doing in my environment. So whether that was having lights on that were, energy efficient, and the energy efficient bulbs, whether, the LEDs or the less energy efficient but cheap, the fluorescent lights, those have, much higher percentage of cool lights frequency in that. So it's a lot of green and blue. And those can be problematic to the production of melatonin, which is a lot of what we're trying to do behaviorally and environmentally to help produce. So when you put on those blue blockers, then that can kind of help be one step in the equation, and the other step being to help control your environment and really, minimize that type of light. And then, of course, we have, photoreceptors on our skin that are also kind of seeking out and having little clocks basically in our cells that are also trying to kind of stay on time or have a sense of what everything should be doing and kind of working together. So ideally, the whole environment mimics more of what we would have seen in the past post sunset. But, of course, again, 21st century. So then some things that we can do are switch over to more kind of red-based light. So have a very weird-looking environment, very biohackery, but have red lights throughout in your space. But if you're not willing to do that, then kind of the romantic like candlelight, fire, lanterns, old school. But if you're still not willing to do that, then next on the scale would be like incandescent bulbs, kind of like if you picture some of those restaurants that are, supposed to be really dim lit and romantic.
So
Edison
it's sort of
bulb.
a hierarchy of light in terms of messing with your circadian rhythm.
Yeah, absolutely. Because point being that basically around the 80s was when a big push to kind of shift away from those more energy inefficient bulbs and over to these more energy efficient bulbs. And then, interestingly, even a rise in sleep deprivation around those points. But, what you just see is the percentage is very different of the cool base tones in those lights versus the older lighting. So if we can kind of go back to some of that, you can make that switch over. And then for the more high-tech people that aren't concerned maybe with EMFs, you can also look at things like Philip Hughes, that you can automate kind of a circadian setting so that it will go very like rosy colored in the evening. So you don't have to really think about it.
Right. I mean, another thought I had, I was wondering if you're familiar with this. I remember hearing about how I heard it was one of the theories behind like cannabis, in particular THC, being helpful for people with PTSD, is that how it sort of interferes with nightmares. And I think it does something with REM sleep. Are you familiar with that at all?
Yeah, actually, I just had one of the foremost researchers on cannabis and CBD as it relates to sleep and, of course, pain management. But yeah, she was actually alluding to some of that research as well, because it's a tricky area. So there's a lot of like testing and person to person of different ratios and kind of getting these things right, because THC can be disruptive to our normal sleep architecture as well, but it can be super helpful to fall asleep, but depending on the type and dosage and all of that, then it can either really help support a healthy sleep architecture or not so much. But yeah, so a lot of people that are dealing with some of that trauma, then they might exhibit some kind of out of the norm or out of the bell curve displays of REM sleep, which REM sleep usually comes in the second half of the night. And so they might have abnormal amounts of REM sleep, heart rate getting to particular high points throughout that. REM is also when our body warms up a bit more. And part of the theories being that we go into REM arguably to kind of like turn our brain back on a bit and prepare to wake up shortly. But yeah, so by bringing in cannabis into the conversation, that can certainly help dull things. But CBD, there's some, promising effects around that, because it kind of leaves out some of the concerns around THC and its effect on our sleep architecture. So definitely, unfortunately, I wish there was more studies that would be done in this area, but for so long, that was sort of a black hole. But now it's exciting that we're starting to see an uptick in that, so we can have a bit more information in that.
But still, as you alluded to, until it becomes federally legal, it's still challenging to do quality studies, because it requires a lot of regulatory barriers and financial ones to get them done.
Absolutely, yeah. So some of you look at these studies and it's like there's 8 people in it, and there's whatever. So it can be challenging to see on a large scale, but I think there's such a changing of the guards around the acceptance of that is a real medicine. So I'm eager to see more come out on that. And of course, from the quantified self movement, a lot of anecdotal evidence for people with their own kind of self-testing, which, can also be really empowering for certain people that have just struggled. And then, oh my God, I take this and I, can kind of restore some semblance of peace in my evenings. So it is an exciting area.
All right. So if somebody was like, what would be your top 3 sleep tips if somebody was having some not some major problems, but they just would like to optimize their sleep? What would be your top 3 tips, and what would be your top 3 favorite sleep tech items to recommend as well?
Yeah, great question. So playing right along with the circadian rhythm entrainment framework, it's kind of going from top down. So light being just so crucial to kind of restoring this balance. So what that would look like is, if you get nothing out of anything I've said today, just beginning your day with a massive hit of sunlight. And what that hit would look like is at least around 20 or so minutes. But, again, the getting outside, not from behind a window, not from behind a car window, but actually physically outside and getting that into your eyes in particular. So that would be number one, and doing that a consistent time each day. So, really like first thing after you wake up. So like the people that own dogs are really well primed for this, to get out and kind of walk them or what have you. And so that would be number one. And then below that, and linked up with light, is then the importance of darkness. So cultivating darkness in a way that's kind of out of the bell curve. So what that can look like is experimenting. I just had a anthropologist and evolutionary biologist on the podcast who challenged everyone to basically engage in a candlelight challenge. And he'll have his students, the professor as well, try to just take on this candlelight challenge for 2 weeks. And so post sunset, you just use candles and see the change in your sleep. And so just doing that, just attempting to go to post sunset, really virtually no faux light, or, make it like fire-based or very, very warm, and see what that will do. And then
how do people do that today without using their phones, though?
yes, exactly. Very good point. So with that, if you have the iPhone, you can literally just Google color filter. So you can, the red light filter for the iPhone. And within the settings, kind of locked, hidden away, is an option to have not the night mode. That's very different. The red filter that will turn your phone all red. So it's like a little fire phone, and you'll be surprised the difference that can feel. If you have an Android, you can get the app Twilight, and it will kind of do the same effect. So you can try with those. And then the third one underneath that would be, temperature. So ensuring that you have clear deviations of temperature throughout the day, since we're, stats even before the lockdown were that the average person in, Western environments were spending upwards of 90% of their day indoors. And so I'd wager that number is even higher than that now. And so from that point, we're very much zoo animals, and having no exposure to the elements in the past, that would be a real clear cue to the body. So when the sun would set, it would just get cold. And so that kind of change, so being really active and, heating up your body during the day, during daylight hours, and then at night, cooling that. And of course, you can hack that inside too, so make it warmer during the day and cooler at night, but also aligning your activity in the same way of that. And, coupled within that is then not doing anything that will heat up your body post sunset. So no eating, no drinking for the most part. I mean, this would be to get optimal sleep if you're committed to that. So those things alone can really change the course of your sleep future and your health in a way that, for me, is just still shocking to me every day, of the difference of how I feel versus how I used to feel. It's incredible.
All right. Well, what about the three sleep tech products you'd recommend?
Sure. Okay. Yes. So I have just about every person that works at Sleep is a Skill that we work with wearing at least the Aura Ring to begin, and then another one that a lot of people like is the Chili Pad. So the Uller, that can be helpful to kind of cool your environment, if no matter what your environment can look like, even if you have, small confined space, AC, no AC, all those things. But also blue blockers can be pretty important too. But ideally the red lens that we discussed, but also knowing that you can have more than one. So you can do, they call kind of transitional red lens, amber lenses. So post sunset wearing those, or if you have to go out and be social, those would be those amber colored ones. And then within the last at least hour, or sometimes more, depending on the person, switching over to those red light ones. But the red are, just, they're much darker. So it's like kind of when you're not doing as much and not going to trip or something. But those things can all really help fundamentally shift your sleep results.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Mollie. Any other final thoughts you have?
Yeah, I just really appreciate you providing a platform and forum to share about what I deem to be one of number one, the most important things that we can do to take on our health, which is kind of a controversial statement, since, many people, when we think of our health, certainly I did for many years, would think, okay, whatever, it's the new year, it's January 1st. In order to take on my health, I'm going to eat X things. I'm going to go to the gym X number of times. And I think what I'd really like to see of a shift in narrative to make, sleep goals, and that putting that as number one then can have a real kind of ripple effect in the rest of those things. Because then when you are rested, the likelihood of you getting to the gym early in the morning or making those healthy food choices really improves for most of us, particularly with the hormonal balancing that can happen when we do get ample sleep. So beginning to shift that conversation to making that number one, I would just love to see more of.
Well, you just made me think about when you were talking about hormones. I know that, it definitely messes with your hormones. I know it, like you'll definitely for men, I know at least, I would imagine probably women too, that if you're sleep deprived, your testosterone levels
Oh, yeah.
significantly lower, reduce.
Yeah, absolutely. Because also women, I've been talking a lot about circadian rhythm, but we also have to worry about infradian rhythm, not worry about, but be mindful of the infradian rhythm. So, throughout the whole monthly cycle, then there's ups and downs in our hormones. So really noticing that, and then the effects that sleep can have on the stabilization of that is really crucial. And to your point around testosterone for men, and a whole slew of other hormones that get normalized when our sleep is rich and consistent, and some of those being leptin and ghrelin. If we're looking to keep, our health and our waistline, then the hunger and satiety hormones can kind of come back to element of homeostasis. And then, of course, normalizing cortisol and melatonin throughout the day. So having that nice rise of cortisol in the morning, and then as it subsides, to kind of shift over to melatonin in the evening. All of those can really kind of come back to workability that so many of us have deviated from and might not even kind of be aware of it.
Yeah, all right. Well, Molly, thanks again. And I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. And
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. And you too.
all right, take care. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.